All right, good to see some familiar names. Hello from Montreal. Hello from Victoria. So yeah, let's get started. It's about 5 minutes past 3, so latecomers have had their chance to come. So let's dive in. So today we're going to talk about privacy and fungibility on Bitcoin. If you haven't seen this before, my name is Mario Gibney. I'm customer support lead at Blockstream, and that's all you need to know. So today we're going to cover things divided into roughly 4 sections. We're going to quickly talk about the goal of fungibility and why we need it. What exactly does fungibility mean? We're going to cover the basics, some existing privacy methods and features on Bitcoin. There's going to be a lot of kind of stuff you probably already know about, but maybe didn't think about as privacy enhancers. Then we're going to talk about the weaknesses, which primarily chain analysis techniques, although there are some other privacy leaks as well we'll discuss. And then we're going to talk about the mitigations. This is going to be more advanced techniques we use to enhance anonymity in Bitcoin, both stuff that's already launched recently and research that's ongoing. So let's dive in. So the goal, fungibility. What does it mean? Why do we need it? So standard definition, we can go to Wikipedia and say, in economics, fungibility is the property of a good or a commodity whose individual units are essentially interchangeable. So all Bitcoins created equal. That's the general idea. If you want to have a functioning currency, you're going to need the different units of that currency to be equal to each other. If the different coins are valued slightly differently, then that makes it a lot less useful, and it introduces a lot of friction into the system. Primarily, the recipients need to worry about where the coins are coming from. So it's easy if we kind of think about physical currencies. This might be physical deterioration. You might be worried if you're accepting a counterfeit bill. Now, those problems don't really exist in Bitcoin because it's not a physical money. So there's no way you can counterfeit one or mint your own knockoffs. But the main obstacle is a coin's history, who used it before you. So we're going to look into that. Just a little interesting aside, fungibility is not like a new issue. This has been an issue since ancient times. So we got some Roman coins for you here. And these used to be made of real precious metals. And so what started happening is that when someone would receive one of these coins in ancient times, they would start shaving off the edges, and so they could acquire, silver dust or gold dust, and then spend the coins again. So it was kind of a way to steal the physical value, and over time you'd accumulate, these little piles of gold dust. And so what they started doing was they started designing coins with these little ridges around the edge, so that if they instructed people you should only accept these coins if the little grooves around the ridges are intact. If they've been kind of sanded away, then you shouldn't accept the coin because someone's taken some of the metal off of it. And interestingly, this kind of has carried on as tradition. Even though today in most countries, the coins are not really made of precious metals anymore, you'll still notice that on the edges they have special grooves or designs. So a little fun tidbit for you. We don't really need to worry about that in Bitcoin because we don't have coins for it. The main issue is the coin's history. So as we talked about in a previous episode, transactions all exist in a block and have to connect to earlier transactions, which means that there is leaked information about where coins might have come from before. What we want all coins to be created equal. So this is fungibility in a nutshell. This is what we are aiming for. And moving forward, we're going to use the terms privacy or anonymity or fungibility sort of interchangeably. Actually, I shouldn't say anonymity, but privacy and fungibility in Bitcoin are pretty close to the same thing. So you might hear me using those terms interchangeably. So the basics, from the start, Bitcoin used public key cryptography as a way to determine ownership over coins. Before I continue again, I should add, for those of you following along right now, if you have any questions, feel free to just type them into the chat box, and I will check occasionally if there are any questions. and try to clarify them before I move on. Oh, there's one already. Yes, this will be uploaded later. So this will be on YouTube. All right. Bitcoin uses public key cryptography to receive coins. This means that there's no identity paired with a certain key. Just as long as you have the private key, you can produce a signature to move coins. And this makes Bitcoin unlike any system that existed before it. So that alone was a big breakthrough. You didn't need any sort of account or KYC. Previously, if you wanted to use digital money, you'd have to do it through a central bank or institution and provide data, and they would see, they would have all this information on you. Bitcoin got rid of that. So just a quick review. When a new block is broadcast, it has new transactions in it. So the way transaction works is, let's look at the first transaction in a block after the Coinbase. You have, let's say it's one input, one output. You have this Bitcoin being sent from one address to another address. And so it's not being sent from a person to a person. Everybody else just sees it's going from this address to that address. Cool. And then it'll also point to a previously confirmed transaction showing, okay, it's the Bitcoin that was sent, earlier up here. This is what's being spent. So now that's no longer spent. This is important. You need to be able to link transactions to earlier ones in order to verify that there are no new coins being artificially created and the supply cap is intact. Other types of transactions, you might have two inputs and one output. So you might have, two different coins being sent to being combined into a single output sent to someone else. And then that might, spend two different previously spent coins from different transactions. And then, the opposite might happen. You might spend from a single output going to two different addresses. And then, lastly, we covered Coinbase transactions, which are the only ones that don't require an input. They involve newly minted Bitcoin and collected transaction fees. All right, so what does this have to do with fungibility? All right, so we've already determined there's some advantage here that, you don't know who owns which addresses by default. The important part of Bitcoin's design system is that you might read that people are often encouraged to not reuse addresses, because if you reuse an address, people can then guess that which coins are both owned by you. So let's say Alice is going to send Bob 35 Bitcoins, and she has a 50 Bitcoin input. As we discussed in an earlier presentation, you can't spend only part of a UTXO. You have to spend the whole UTXO. So then it gets split into two outputs, and one of them is the change outputs that's being sent back to Alice. So if these two addresses are the same, then anyone looking at this, they might not know who Alice is, they might not know who Bob is, but they'll be able to see, okay, someone sent 35 Bitcoins to this person, and they still have 15 Bitcoins left if you reuse an address. So avoiding address reuse is one of the important basic techniques used in Bitcoin. So any Bitcoin wallet that's really worth its salt is going to not reuse addresses by default. It'll generate new ones. So these should be different. So let's take a look at how this is done. So you may know, if you remember from our basic overview of public key cryptography, an address generally involves a public key, which has a private key. There's a pair there, and if you have the private key, you can generate the signature, which lets you move the funds. So hierarchical deterministic wallets, or HD wallets, involve a single master key. So you have your new wallet. You're going to generate, let's say you're going to generate a new wallet. It creates a master key, and it creates a mnemonic seed. So it's the set of words that you use to derive your master key again. And then from the master key, you can derive a whole bunch of other private keys, and each private key means a new potential address to use. So this is how most wallets in Bitcoin works. Any of the good ones are going to continually give you new addresses whenever you go to get a new one. I'm just going to see any questions so far. All right, still everyone's keeping up. All right, we're going to touch on a thing called pay-to-script hash as well. Now, we talked earlier in the presentation, in the second one, about different scripting. and how you don't only send funds to a single recipient. You can have different spending conditions, and here we have an example of this 50 bitcoins can be spent in two ways. It can either be spent by Alice if she signs it after 1 week time lock, or Bob can sign for it if he knows some secret. So this is an output that's used in Lightning Network channel creation. All right, so then if it gets spent, Bob produces, fulfills the spending conditions, and then he gets to send the Bitcoin wherever he wants. Script hash, pay to script hash is a way that allows you to hide some of this information until it gets spent. So instead of, if you want to send to, with some certain spending conditions, instead you can just create a hash of all that spending conditions. So you have this list, the script, and you hash it, and then in your output, you just say, pay to script hash. So you need to produce a script that has this hash, and then produce the spending conditions. So what this means is it actually hides the spending conditions until it gets spent later on. So Bob wants to spend this, he then produces the script and spending conditions. Now this might not seem like such an amazing, boost to privacy, but it gets built on by some concepts we're going to cover later on. So it's quite an important step. And this has been on Bitcoin for quite some years now. And there are also some other side benefits, but we're not going to get into those today. So yeah, these are, I was just giving you an overview there of some features of Bitcoin that have been around for a while and are kind of mostly default at this point. So now we're going to look into chain analysis techniques. So most, but not all, of the weaknesses in Bitcoin's privacy comes from chain analysis techniques, ways that snoopers or analytics companies can look at the blockchain and kind of guess and track where activity is going to or from. So there's you'll have no problem finding a whole bunch of stories online about this stuff, about the NSA or the FBI or different government organizations tracking activity and using them as a way to arrest people. And they may or you may or may not agree with there's about whether or not governments should have the right to track down criminals using this stuff. Even if you're okay with that, you should recognize that the fact that these techniques exist is a weakness to Bitcoin's fungibility. It makes it less useful as a currency. And it can be used for good reasons as well. Like this is pictured here, we have Kim Nielsen. And he was part of a group that used chain analytics to track down what happened to a bunch of stolen coins when Mt. Gox went down, which was the biggest exchange at the time. And I think some people will call it Bitcoin archaeology. And yeah, they were able to get quite a bit of information and track a lot of coins to a certain exchange that ended up getting shut down for money laundering later on. And they were able to create a really sophisticated map of where these coins came and went. And it's a rather interesting field. But again, this is, even if you want to catch the hackers who stole the coins there, you got to remember that the fact that this stuff is possible is quite problematic for Bitcoin's fungibility. All right, so we've already covered address reuse, but this isn't a perfect system. Even if the addresses are different, the recipient will know can be pretty sure it's a change output, and other people can also make guesses at whether or not it's a change output. So one thing that used to happen is that, I'm not sure this has happened for a while, but some of these analytics companies would sprinkle a whole bunch of addresses with tiny amounts. So they would just take a whole bunch of already used addresses and deliberately send small amounts of Bitcoin to them. And then the wallet would sweep them up later into, the wallet would spend them later. And then the snoopers or the people, the chain analytics companies could then figure out, okay, so these addresses got spent along with these other addresses, and they could connect them and make a guess that, okay, these are the same owners. So that's what this would look like here. So maybe Alice had this previous address, and someone sent this like tiny amount, 0.0001 Bitcoin to it, and then later on Alice's wallet spent both of them together, they can say, okay, these two outputs belong to the same person. There are other heuristics they use. So there's the whole number heuristic. So this idea is that if there's a whole number in two outputs, that's probably the payment, and the other output is probably a change output. Because let's say Alice wants to send Bob 1 Bitcoin, this is what the transaction would look like. So even if the person looking at the transaction has no idea whose signature belongs to who, they look at that whole number, they can guess, okay, this is probably the change output down here, so these are probably the same owners, and they can track the activity of coins that way. And it's even worse because you don't even need whole numbers to do that. You might have something where maybe both of the outputs have a lot of decimal places, but one of them might correspond to a whole number in dollars. Maybe Alice wanted to send Bob, $100 back in the day. And you could check, what the exchange rate was on the day that this was confirmed, and then the amount, and say, okay, this is an even amount, and they could guess maybe the top one is the change output. So these are the main type of heuristics that companies use. If you can figure out the change outputs and who's a common spender of several different UTXOs, then you can put together quite a detailed list of activity. And it's not only chain analysis techniques. This is I'm just going to give you one example of other ways that privacy can be leaked. So this is we're going to talk about a thing called Dandelion routing. So what we're looking at here is this is a visualization of a whole bunch of nodes together on the network, connected to each other, and they're all trading information about new transactions being broadcasted, new blocks being mined. And let's say I'm this green node right here, and I have a new transaction that I want to broadcast to the network. I would presumably broadcast this, and it would first go to the 4 nodes around me, and then they would broadcast them to their peers, and they would kind of spread out from my node as the center point. Some company that's trying to break Bitcoin's privacy and figure out more about who I am and whose transaction is coming from where, they might operate a whole bunch of different nodes in the network, signified by these red dots. And what they can do is they can figure out, depending on which of their nodes first receives a transaction, they can guess roughly where the transaction came from. So if the green node is broadcasting transaction first, this node right here will receive it first, and later on this node might receive it, and then these two. So this is somewhat analogous to a technique called triangulation. This is what seismographers use to determine the epicenters of earthquakes. If you have at least 3 different stations that record tremors, depending on what time the tremor hits them, they can make a guess as to where it started. So it's a somewhat analogous technique. So now we're going to start talking about more advanced methods and research. So just to hit on that last point, one of the defenses against this is a thing called Dandelion routing. This isn't live on Bitcoin yet. It's being actively developed, last I heard. But this is a way to obfuscate where a transaction is being broadcasted from. So let's say this time, our node in question is in the top right there, this green node, and they want to broadcast transaction to the network. If they just broadcast from here, this red node will get it first, and then next this node, and then these two, and then the owner of the red nodes can make a guess where it came from. Using Dandelion routing, instead of broadcasting to all your peers at once, the node will just send to a single peer, and there will be kind of a countdown timer. So it gets sent sort of in a straight line, or not even a straight line, just one node to one node to one node. And then after a certain number of hops, it broadcasts from that node, and then it gets sent out to the network. If this becomes a standard way for transactions to broadcast, this really, really obfuscates the origin of these transactions. So it makes it harder for an attacker to kind of figure out where they're coming from. All right, so there are many more dimensions here. I just wanted to touch on at least one technique that didn't have to do with chain analysis, because almost everything else in the presentation is about chain analysis and history of coins. We're going to get back to that now. So if you tuned in for the last presentation, we talked about Lightning Network and how Lightning channels are created. And now Lightning is primarily touted as a scalability boost. It makes payments better because it makes them faster and makes them much more cheap. But it also does obfuscate chain analysis a lot. It increases privacy because once you have opened a channel, the micropayments within that channel don't get recorded on the blockchain. So you can't use your regular chain analysis techniques to figure out where payments went to. You just know a bunch of funds went into a channel and a bunch of funds came out of the channel. And that's it. All the activity inside there is happening at a completely separate level. Now, there might be other, there's going to be another conflict going on at the Lightning Network level. So again, none of these are foolproof solutions, but this does help enhance privacy. One of the downsides, as you might notice, is that there's probably a way for you could probably guess, looking at this transaction, there's a decent chance that this would have been Lightning channel opening and closing. But we're gonna get to a solution for that later on too. And now we're going to talk about a thing called CoinJoin. So CoinJoin is an idea that's been around for a long time and actually doesn't require any fancy protocol changes or scripting. It kind of was pretty much possible from the day Bitcoin launched, as far as I understand. And it's a way that if there are several transactions to be sent, users can combine all their transactions into one very large one so that it's not clear which input is going to which output. There have been some mixer services that offered this, where you kind of send your coins to a central party and then they need to send it to everyone else. But the problem with this is that the mixer themselves, you need to be able to trust them, and then they will also know everyone's, the origin and destination of everyone's coins. So that's not ideal. But with CoinJoin, you can actually work with other parties. You don't need a trusted party. You can cooperate and sign a single transaction. There is one major problem with this, which is that generally you don't have everybody sending the same amounts to each other. So if the amounts are different, it's very, very easy to see, whose funds came from where. So in this situation, like, you can see a 10 Bitcoin input probably matches the 10 Bitcoin output. Same with the 80 Bitcoin input, the 80 Bitcoin output, etc. So you need a way to get around this. Now, the way with CoinJoin implementations today, they get around this by simply requiring that the outputs all be the exact same amount. And if you can get very, very large CoinJoin transactions going, this is an example of one of the largest CoinJoins yet. I believe this was from Wasabi Wallet, which is one of the user wallets out there that has a CoinJoin protocol. And all of the outputs were exactly, 0.1002606 Bitcoin. And as you can see, this is a really large anonymity set. If you're a chain analytics company, you don't know which inputs lead to which outputs. So yeah, you can use this today. This is working. And there was also, like when I created this slide originally, there was the original proposal was a thing called BustaPay. It was an attempt to do a minimal coin join. There are a lot of similar variations on this that are being worked on. This is a way to try and do minimal coin join. I think pay to endpoint was one other pros implementation. But the idea is, like, if Alice is going to send Bob some Bitcoins, we have our problems we stated earlier about guessing which is the change output. The recipient, if they're online at the same time, could also provide an input to the transaction. So, Bob's supposed to receive 30 Bitcoins from Alice. He could add his own input of 20 Bitcoins and then just add 20 Bitcoins as his output, and they could broadcast this transaction instead. So what this would do is really obscure which is the change output, which is the which is the payment, and it's like a little bit of a mini coin join. You don't need to do this extra coin join transaction. It's just part of the payment. There are some drawbacks with this, of course. You both need to be online at the same time for this particular kind of naive implementation, and in this situation, less information is leaked to the network, but more information about the recipient is leaked to the sender. So there's that drawback. The sender will now know this was your output, whereas with a regular payment they wouldn't know that. But there are lots and lots of kind of variations on this being worked at the same time. But they all work on a similar principle. If you can kind of jumble up inputs and outputs, it makes chain analytics much more difficult. Another technique is called confidential transactions. This is a slightly different animal. This uses some different cryptography. The way Bitcoin works at present is that all of the amounts and all the inputs and outputs are visible. This is a way to ensure that there are no new Bitcoins being artificially created. Now, it was discovered that you can use a certain type of zero-knowledge proof cryptography to get you the same sort of guarantee without revealing the amounts. So you can see that x equals y plus z to make sure that no new Bitcoins have been created, and then you still can't see the amounts that are being spent. Now, it should be pretty clear how this is a big boost to fungibility. One of the challenges is that how do you know somebody doesn't have a negative amount? If you have 10 equals negative 100 plus 110. So if you allow someone to have negative amounts, they can just mint Bitcoin out of nowhere. So you need to have a thing called a range proof. A range proof is a cryptographic proof that a number exists between 0 and 21 million. One of the drawbacks of the range proof is that it takes up quite a bit of space. If you have a transaction that requires a range proof, it's going to be something like 10 times the size of a regular Bitcoin transaction. Now, that's been reduced a lot. There's a thing called bullet proofs, were a technique that allowed for the existence of much, much smaller range proofs. But again, these are still several times larger than existing Bitcoin transactions. So this is not live on Bitcoin. This would require some rather significant changes to the Bitcoin protocol, which aren't really being considered at the moment. There are a whole bunch of considerations, but this is currently live on Liquid Network. That's the side chain, which is maintained by Blockstream, and yeah, you can already use this today. If you go on and peruse the Liquid Network through a block explorer or your own Liquid node, you can validate all the transactions, but you can't see the amounts for most of them. Now, confidential transactions and CoinJoin work really well together. They really complement each other. This should be pretty easy to see, but remember, the main drawback of CoinJoin was that if you can see the amounts, you can often match the inputs to the outputs. So that means that you need all the outputs to be the same amount. But if the amounts are hidden, then this isn't an issue at all. You could simply have a CoinJoin with confidential transactions where W, X, Y, Z can all be precise amounts, and everyone can see that they equal STUV, but they don't know what they are. So yeah, these really complement each other. Another thing we're going to talk briefly about is signature aggregation. Now, signature aggregation itself isn't really a direct benefit to privacy, but it does help incentivize it a little bit more in some ways. So the basic idea is that with certain types of digital signatures, you can add all the signatures together to create a single aggregate signature that's indistinguishable. Like if you're from an outside party, it'll be indistinguishable from a regular single signature. But then it can sign something that would otherwise require a bunch of signatures. So let's look at how this might be used in practice. So first of all, if you're doing signature aggregation with confidential transactions and CoinJoin, if you can get a thing called cross-input aggregation, instead of having 4 different signatures, you can just have a single signature here. This helps compensate for confidential transactions being much larger, because then instead of having 4 signatures, you just have 1. Now this is a big deal because signatures are one of the largest pieces of a transaction by data size, so that's beneficial there. And it becomes more powerful when you add it to something else like a Merkleized abstract syntax tree. So these are expansion on pay-to-script hash that I explained a little bit earlier in the presentation, where instead of For your spending conditions in your output, you don't just say what they are, you say, here's a hash with spending conditions. With masked, you don't even need to reveal all of the different spending conditions. You only need to reveal the ones that actually get fulfilled. So as you may recall, we have these two separate spending conditions here. And if we're filling the second one with masked, you only need to reveal that one. So let's take a look at how this works. The PaytoScript hash works as I've circled up here. You just take a hash of all the spending conditions. Using masked, you have a Merkle tree where you hash each individual spending condition separately, and then you hash those together into a tree. So here's how the spending input would work with PaytoScript hash as it works now. With masked, instead of including the separate spend condition, you just include the hash. So you can still verify that this was part of the tree that produced the root hash, but you only need to reveal the spending condition that ended up being fulfilled. And so yeah, you can see here, this data becomes much smaller because writing down a single branch of the tree, one of the hashes there, it takes up a lot less space than describing the whole script. And this is how it would look in a transaction. You get your masked root hash instead of just a script hash here, and then you can sign this way. This becomes even more powerful when combined with Taproot, which is a proposal being discussed right now for Bitcoin, and if the community wants it, it might actually be added in the next year or two. So Taproot is an expansion on masked. What it does is it was observed that if you have these kind of complicated spending conditions, it generally means there are multiple parties involved. And if you have signature aggregation, you realize that as long as everybody cooperates by the end of it and it acknowledges who's going to get to spend the output, you could have this n of n multisig, meaning you have this branch of the tree that just means everybody signs it. Now, using signature aggregation, that can be reduced to a single signature. And Taproot allows for a sort of tweak of the root hash so that this spending condition here is actually embedded in a piece of data with the root hash. So this means that even if you've got this big complicated spending tree, the only thing you would need to reveal at the end is a single signature, which is the aggregate of everybody's signature who's taking part of the transaction, that spends from what looks like just a regular public key from Taproot or regular address. Now, this is quite a big deal because what this means is that someone looking at this has no idea if this was actually just sent to a single individual or if this was the result of a smart contract and being fulfilled to its completion. This might be what's going on behind the curtain. This is what it would look like if it was PaytoScript hash. But yeah, we get this result using Taproot. This is especially good, especially for Lightning Network channels, because then instead of having these multi-sig outputs, you could just have this single signature spent from a Taproot output. All right, so we have there's a major outstanding issue. I'm trying to make sure. Do we have? Okay, it seems we got a question coming in. I know I threw kind of a lot at you just at the end there, so I'll wait until everyone's make sure we're all on the same page before we go on. Oh, seems the question's taking a minute to come in. All right, I'll come back to the question then if it's going to take a while to write it out. All right, so we're going to talk about this one major outstanding issue, which is that fungibility is heavily determined by the least private type of common transaction. So what this means is that you need a lot of people participating in anonymity techniques in order for them to be useful. If 90% of an economy operates completely transparently, even if the last 10% is using some very, very enhanced privacy techniques, they're going to have a very, very small anonymity set to work with. So it makes it so one of the design considerations here is that when we're adding new features to Bitcoin, we want to make sure not just that privacy techniques are possible. We also want to make sure that people are incentivized to do them. So this, there's been speculation that this might be a very contentious issue going forward, because not everybody involved in Bitcoin cryptocurrencies is in agreement as to how important fungibility is, and there might be attempts by governments or entities who want transparency to oppose this type of thing. So this is an important thing to keep in mind moving forward. And yeah, that's just a bit for today. So don't trust, verify. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you have any questions, you want me to go back and review anything, please just type in the box below, and happy to get back to you. I know this is technical. Oh, you're asking me about a statement from Nuchin. Yeah, sorry, that question is a bit beyond the scope of this this presentation. I'm not really sure. Like, I mean, regulation can do certain things. Like, there's a dimension that I didn't touch on in this presentation involving if you're ever using a centralized, a company or like a custodial service, to purchase Bitcoin, like people do in exchanges, these techniques won't be helpful for that, because, if they're subject to regulation and KYC. At the same time, like, once you remove your Bitcoins from an exchange, then you can enter this world where you can take greater steps to answer privacy. The degree to which regulation can affect Bitcoin's privacy is, no one knows the real answer to that. Like, it definitely can be a problem. To what degree, we're going to have to see going forward. Question: when's the next webinar? I'm not sure yet, actually. We're going to be taking a break from these for a while, but yeah, we'll see if there's a lot of interest in my on, but we don't have another one planned at the moment. Why do you think Lightning hasn't been used on DNMs yet? I don't know what DNM is. Alan, if you could let me know. Darknet markets. Why hasn't Lightning been used in darknet markets yet? I'm not sure. I would guess. I mean, Lightning is still in its infancy. I know that it's still somewhat risky to use it. Your money's in hot wallets. The software isn't perfect or complete yet. I would imagine that that as it becomes more broadly useful, like oftentimes when people discuss what is and isn't being used by like a darknet market, or it's similar to, if you think about criminal activity with cash, like people use the US dollar for those types of activities because US dollar is broadly useful. So I would imagine that you'll see more of an uptick as Lightning becomes more broadly useful. That would be my guess on it. I don't know the exact answer, but I kind of expect that you're going to see more Lightning usage everywhere going forward as the software gets a bit more rounded out and completed. Any other questions? Thanks for tuning in, guys. Okay, I'm waiting around for another question, but what do you think about services like Samurai? I don't know a lot about Samurai's privacy techniques. I haven't had a chance to look into them much myself. Like this presentation, as you guys probably noticed, I didn't really dig into specific implementations very closely. I was trying to give a broad overview of the kind of general problem and the general approaches to fixing them. So I'm not comfortable kind of recommending or anti-recommending any specific implementations just yet. And frankly, I just don't know a whole lot about them. Are there global initiatives intended to preserve privacy and fungibility linked metadata linked to service uses? I have no idea. That's that's a good question, but it's beyond the scope of this talk. I'm just like, if you're talking about global initiatives for Bitcoin specifically among users, like I know that there are different groups, but that meet regularly and try to work on these issues, but it sounds like you're asking about a bit of a broader scope than we're talking about here. The Bitcoin protocol seems quite protected, or at least studied. Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is very, very difficult to change by design, so it's hard to. So that also means that, you know, if the updates that we add do enhance privacy, that's, yeah, it makes it a lot harder to de-anonymize than a lot of other systems. I mean, like exchanges data. Yeah. Okay. Again, like this is I'm not sure. I don't know about that, Leah. It's a little bit beyond what we're talking about today. It's a good question, though. Thank you. Yeah. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions. So thank you very much for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, don't trust, verify. See you another time.